Southern Gothic and A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. This week we move into a time of Southern mystery, grotesque history, tension, hysteria, and disturbia as we dive into the literary genre known as Southern Gothic. During this period, many famous authors contributed to the dark feeling that is Southern Gothic literature, such as Flannery O'Connor, Carson McCullers, Harper Lee, Tennessee Williams, and Truman Capote. In this genre, the disturbing and grotesque are described in a flowery fashion. The humor is dark and the dread is palpable. In some Southern Gothic pieces, the supernatural is used to add horror, and in others, the supernatural is not used, and the idea that reality can be worse than ghosts or monsters is present. Charles Crow once stated that the South became the principal region of American Gothic in literature. Southern Gothic historical context. Like realism, a literary movement decades before, Southern Gothic brings to light what has happened before, but in a more terrifying way. The Southern Gothic genre boomed during the 19th and 20th centuries. It is rooted in the South's tensions and alienation from parts of the country. The Southern Gothic brings to light the region's historical realities: slavery, racism, misogyny, and patriarchy. The region's historical realities of racism, slavery, and patriarchy take strong forms in the shape of ghosts, monsters, or real life illnesses that highlight all that has been endured. Because of its dark and controversial material, literary scholars and critics initially wanted to discredit the genre. However, it was shown to not only educate, but to help create discussion on how to improve. The beginning of its history can be traced back to the 17th century Europe, when Gothic literature first began to take form. After the years, it spread to America. The American Gothic genre began to take forms in different regions, specifically the South, thus the birth of Southern Gothic. The history of this genre can also be traced back to the 19th century with the famous poet Edgar Allan Poe. He is said to be one of the greatest Gothic writers of all times, due to him being the only one to truly explore the genre for the first time. Although his pieces do not necessarily take place in the South, they contain the characteristics of the Southern Gothic genre. William Faulkner further expanded the genre by contrasting the Old and New South, creating a sense of isolation and uncomfort. Characteristics of Southern Gothic. The Southern Gothic genre is characterized by different traits, the biggest ones being the horrifying realities of the South during the 19th and 20th centuries, such as racism, slavery, and patriarchy. This also ties into the traits of oppression and discrimination that some of the characters might face. To convey these harsh realities in an even more disturbing way, the use of supernatural is often sometimes used: ghosts, monsters, etc. There is an air of mystery that lingers throughout the story, making the reader on edge about what is to come. Isolation makes itself known throughout the characters' conflict. Most characters in this genre often feel alone or as if they have no one to help them with their moral dilemmas. One of the final traits of this genre is the deeply disturbing and eccentric characters that come in and out of the story. They may have a dark background that adds to the gloom, or may be too perfect, which the reader may infer that there is something off about them. Overall, these characteristics add to the freakish and dark aesthetic of the Southern Gothic genre. William Faulkner. William Faulkner was born in 1897 in Oxford, Mississippi. He joined the Canadian and later the British Royal Air Force during the First World War. He then studied at the University of Mississippi, where he wrote for the student newspaper The Mississippian, submitting his first published poem and other short story works. Wanting to create a legacy for himself, he began to write stories and develop characters based on the historical drama that plagued Southern culture. He developed his own fictional Southern area known as Yoknapatawpah County and based his stories there. Faulkner became known for his spot-on dictation of the Southern speech. He also highlighted many social issues that most writers excluded, including slavery, patriarchy, and classism. A Rose for Emily. As you can infer, A Rose for Emily is a short story, just like most of the pieces we have been observing for the Literature Unit Workup Project. There are so many confusions about the setup of this story, along with the characters it portrays. Because this story falls under the Southern Gothic genre, it contains traits of isolation, paranoia, insanity, and racial tensions. The story follows different townspeople as they witness Emily Grierson, a shy and mysterious woman, mourning the loss of her father and spiral into grief-ridden insanity. The story is set up in 5 different parts, however, each part takes place in a different period than the others and is placed out of order. Section 1 takes place after her father's death, and Section 2 takes place 30 years earlier. By having each section out of order, the narrative time is complexing, further adding to the sense of isolation and hysteria. Common themes and symbols in A Rose for Emily. The 5 stages of grief. Because there are 5 sections of this short story, some readers have experimented with the idea that each section correlates to one of the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. However, this has been difficult to prove because the section's narrative times are out of order. The power of death and the refusal to change. After her father's death, grief prevails over Emily's life, refusing her to move on. It causes her to make a world of her own, where the foundation of this world is insanity that grief has given to her. Because of the hold death has on her life, Emily cannot change. She is unable to move on and instead denies any sense of wrongdoing. The Grierson residence. Emily's home acts as a dungeon for her, but it is also a statue of what is left in the Old South. As death will not let Emily move on, the house refuses to adapt to the South. The house almost mirrors Emily. It is stubborn and will not accept the fact that the world is changing, and so must she. The house also represents a key trait of the Southern Gothic genre: hysteria. Every bad thing that has driven Emily to insanity has taken place or is living in this house. It is a constant reminder of what happened and what drove Emily to insanity.